the small town of Redfield, Vermont, coating every rooftop like powdered silence. December had settled in, and with it, a kind of stillness that made people whisper even when they were alone. On the edge of town stood a gray two-story colonial house. The shutters hung slightly crooked, the porch light buzzed faintly, and the mailbox was stuffed with unopened letters. That house belonged to Richard Bellamy, a former sheriff, war veteran, and father. And on the 13th day of that quiet December, Richard was found dead. The call came in at 6:42 a.m., a woman's voice, soft but firm. "I need an ambulance. My father isn't breathing. I think he's dead." Cold. Richard sat slumped in his favorite armchair, his mouth slightly open, remote in hand. The television was still glowing, frozen on a static channel. His daughter, 17-year-old Clara Bellamy, stood in the hallway. She was barefoot, wearing an oversized hoodie, her face pale and unreadable. Detective Claire Jensen arrived shortly after the coroner. She had worked in Redfield for 11 years and had known Richard professionally. He was tough, no nonsense, and had a reputation for being old school. She remembered shaking his hand when she first joined the force. His grip had been crushing. She took one look at the scene and felt something was wrong. There were no signs of forced entry, no bruises or wounds, no chaos, just a man who looked like he had fallen asleep. Except his lips were blue, and his fingernails had faint crescent-shaped cuts. When the coroner rolled him onto his side, they found a mark, small, almost hidden, on the back of his neck, a needle puncture. Detective Jensen crouched beside the chair. "That's not natural," she muttered. The coroner nodded. "Could be a sedative, but we'll need tox screens." Clara stood silently nearby, arms wrapped around herself. Her face betrayed no grief, no panic, just cold detachment. Jensen stood and walked over to her. "Clara, were you here when this happened?" Clara nodded. "I was upstairs. I didn't hear anything." "Did your father take any medication?" Clara hesitated. "Just his blood pressure pills." Jensen made a note. "When did you last see him alive?" "Last night. He watched TV after dinner like always. I went to bed." The detective glanced around the room. The living room was immaculate, too perfect. A single empty glass on the side table. Jensen raised it to her nose. Vodka. Strong. The kitchen had one dish in the sink, a plate of unfinished spaghetti. And the trash bin held only a crushed bottle of sleeping pills. Upstairs, Clara's room was sparse. A twin bed, one shelf of books, no posters. Her laptop sat open, a biology document still on screen. But inside her drawer, under some socks, Jensen found a syringe. It was empty, clean, but not clean enough. Lab tests later would reveal trace amounts of diazepam, a potent sedative. At the precinct, Jensen reviewed Richard Bellamy's record. He was once decorated for heroism during a hostage situation, but over the years, complaints had surfaced. Nothing official ever stuck, but rumors swirled. Excessive discipline, emotional abuse, a discipline chair he used on his daughter. Jensen called in the former housekeeper, Rosa Delgado. She hadn't worked there in 3 years, but she remembered Clara. She was like a prisoner, Rosa said. He never let her out alone, not even to walk the dog. And once, I saw bruises. "Did you report it?" Jensen asked.
Rosa looked down. He was the sheriff. Who would listen?
Meanwhile, Clara was staying with her aunt across town, a woman named Lila who hadn't spoken to Richard in over a decade. When Jensen visited, Lila didn't mince words. He was a monster in a uniform. The man broke her. She showed Jensen old photos, Clara with sunken eyes, hunched shoulders, sleeves always pulled down to her wrists, even in summer. Jensen ordered a full forensic sweep of the Bellamy house. In the attic, behind a panel, they found a hidden camera system. Wires ran down through the walls, connected to a screen in the basement. There they discovered room 13, a locked utility room with a single chair, a chain bolted to the floor, and stains on the cement. Forensics confirmed blood on the chair. Old, human, likely Clara's. Jensen requested Clara come in for formal questioning. She arrived in a black sweater, no expression, hands folded neatly. "Clara," Jensen said gently, "did your father ever hurt you?" Clara stared at the table. "He raised me, that's all." "Did you inject him with something last night?" Clara paused for nearly a full minute, then whispered, I did what I had to do. She didn't deny it, not once, but she didn't elaborate either. With enough evidence for probable cause, Clara was arrested for second-degree murder. No bail was granted. Her aunt wept quietly in the courtroom. Public reaction was mixed. Some called her a monster. Others whispered she was a survivor who snapped. In jail, Clara remained composed. She refused therapy, spent most days reading, mostly psychology and law. A month before trial, she requested a private meeting with Detective Jensen. "You asked if he hurt me," she said softly. "He did worse than hurt me. He erased me." She handed Jensen a flash drive. "These are the journal files. I type them every night. Password is 13. Inside were 87 encrypted entries, dates stretching back 6 years, details of punishments, physical abuse, forced isolation, surveillance. Entry number 42 read, "He says the world is dangerous, so he keeps me safe, but safe feels like a cage." Entry number 61, "He told me if I ever ran, he'd find me, that no one would believe me, that I was lucky he let me eat." Jensen forwarded the files to the DA. A decision was made to reduce the charge to voluntary manslaughter. The trial began that summer. Redfield Courthouse was packed with reporters, activists, and local citizens. Some carried signs that said, "Free Clara." Others read, "Justice for Richard." The prosecutor painted Clara as calculated and cold. "She planned it," he said. "She chose poison over escape." The defense told a different story. She lived in a prison disguised as a home, and when no door opened, she made one herself. On the fourth day, Clara took the stand. The courtroom held its breath. Clara adjusted the microphone. Her voice was quiet but clear. "My father believed pain was a lesson. I lived in a classroom built from fear." She described room 13 as a place of silence. There were no screams because screams were punished with more time. When asked why she didn't run away, Clara responded, "I didn't know where the world ended," and he began. The jury was riveted. Some jurors leaned forward, expressions blank, absorbing every word. "He said no one would believe me, and he was almost right." The prosecutor tried to shake her. "But you're intelligent. You had access to the internet, books. Why not seek help?" Clara looked him dead in the eye. "You don't call the fire department when the fire is the man holding the phone." Her Aunt Lila testified next. She cried when describing how Richard isolated Clara from the rest of the family. "He blocked our calls, returned our letters. We didn't even know where they lived for years." Then came forensic expert Dr. Reynolds. He confirmed. The injection mark on Richard's neck was consistent with a dose of diazepam, administered while unconscious or subdued. A former deputy, Thomas Price, was called to the stand. He confessed Richard once bragged about his methods with Clara. He said, "A girl needs to learn control. Mine's never gonna end up like those other sluts in town." The gallery gasped. One juror visibly flinched. Jensen, in her testimony, said, "In all my years as a detective, I've never seen a child survive this level of psychological warfare." Clara didn't act out of malice. She acted out of desperation. Closing arguments were delivered on the 10th day. The prosecution asked for 25 years. The defense pleaded for mercy. A former deputy, Thomas Price, was called to the stand. He confessed Richard once bragged about his methods with Clara. When they returned, the courtroom was still. Even the wind outside had stopped howling. The verdict: guilty of voluntary manslaughter, sentence 10 years, eligible for parole in 6. Some wept, others stared. Clara didn't move. She whispered, "I expected worse." As she was escorted out, she glanced once at Detective Jensen. A nod passed between them, not of friendship, but of understanding. Prison life was both harder and easier for Clara. The rules were clear, the threats were visible. There were no hidden cameras. She joined a reading program, tutored inmates in math, kept to herself. Every year on the anniversary of her father's death, she received an anonymous letter with only 3 words. "You were right." The letters never had a return address. Clara never replied, but she kept them in a small box under her bunk. 2 years into her sentence, a journalist named Aaron Malloy requested an interview for a podcast. Clara declined 5 times. On the 6th, she agreed. The podcast titled The Girl in Room 13 went viral. Millions tuned in to hear Clara's voice. "I'm not proud of what I did," she said, "but I've never felt safer than I do now." Erin Malloy published a companion book. It spent 11 weeks on the NYT bestseller list. Public opinion shifted. Clara became a symbol for trapped children. Advocacy groups formed. Laws changed. In Vermont, Clara's law passed in 2026. It allowed children to petition for third-party home evaluations without parental consent. Clara received a letter from the governor. She didn't open it. In her 4th year, her Aunt Lila passed away. Clara was not allowed to attend the funeral. She cried for the first time in years, not for her father, not for the past, but for someone who tried to love her. In therapy, finally accepted after 3 years, she began to speak differently. She didn't kill a man, her therapist said later. She killed a cage. Parole hearings began in year 5. The board was divided. Some said she had served enough. Others worried she had never expressed true remorse. Clara told them, "I don't regret surviving, but I regret that the only way I could was through death." They granted parole. She was released after 6 years, 2 months, and 11 days. Freedom felt unnatural. Air tasted too big. The sky felt like a ceiling she could never reach. She moved to Maine, changed her last name, took a job at a secondhand bookstore. Customers rarely spoke to her. She liked it that way. One night, a teenage girl came in with bruises on her wrists and silence in her eyes. Clara handed her a free book, The Courage to Run. Inside the cover was a sticky note with a phone number. Clara began volunteering secretly with runaway shelters, never revealing who she was. In time, the nightmares faded, not entirely, but enough. She adopted a cat, named him Deputy, and every December 13th, she walked alone to the shore, stood in the freezing wind, and whispered, "I'm still here." The waves never answered, but they never needed to. Clara lived quietly in Maine. No interviews, no books, no Netflix deal, despite dozens of offers. She believed silence had value, that healing didn't need a stage. But every few months, a letter still arrived, unsigned, stamped from different states. Always the same 3 words, "You were right." She began to wonder, was it someone from her jury, from her past, or just a stranger who had been listening? Clara started writing, not about her trauma, but about escape. Her first short story was published in a local magazine. It was titled The Locked Window, a tale of a girl who turns her prison into wings. It got attention. A professor from a state university reached out. "Ever thought about teaching?" She declined, but it planted a seed. She enrolled anonymously in a creative writing course. Her professor called her stories haunting and necessary. In one piece, she wrote, "Some daughters bury their fathers in soil, others bury them in silence." One night, she returned home to find her door slightly ajar. Her cat was unharmed, nothing stolen, but something left behind. On her kitchen table, a small box. Inside, a VHS tape labeled December 13th, 2024, room 13. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen a tape in years, let alone one from that room. She drove 2 towns over, found a shop that still converted VHS to digital. When she finally watched it, her hands trembled. The tape showed Richard sitting in the basement speaking directly into the camera. "If anything happens to me," he said, "it was her." He rambled, blaming Clara for defiance, calling her possessed, warning the world that she would burn it down. Then, at the end of the video, something changed. He cried. For the first time, she saw him break. "I tried to make her strong," he said. "I didn't know how else to love her." Clara closed the laptop. She didn't cry. But for a moment, she felt something unfamiliar. Pity. She buried the drive in the woods, not out of fear, but because some truths didn't need witnesses. Clara began therapy again, this time not because she had to, but because she wanted to understand. She read psychology books late into the night, researched generational trauma, patterns of abuse, and one night, while watching snowfall, she said aloud, "He was a villain, but he was also a victim." Not to excuse him, never, but to finally step outside his shadow. Years passed. She grew older. Her hair grew longer, her steps lighter. One summer, a girl named Ava arrived at the shelter Clara volunteered at. She had run from a home full of locks. Ava reminded Clara of herself, too quiet, too still. Over time, they talked. Ava laughed for the first time in months. Clara baked a cake for her birthday. "I didn't think adults could be safe," Ava whispered once. Clara smiled. Some of us are trying. Clara's writing career grew slowly. Her second published book was fiction, but based in truth. It was a story about a girl with no voice who learned to speak through storms. Critics called it shatteringly intimate. Some guessed the author's real identity, none confirmed. In interviews, she never used her full name, never showed her face. She didn't want to be famous, she wanted to be free. In 2030, Clara turned 30. She hosted a quiet dinner with 3 shelter girls, her cat, and a chocolate cake. "I never had birthdays growing up," she told them, "so now I make sure others do." The shelter staff began calling her Miss C. They never pried into her past. But the director once said, "Whatever you went through, it made you a lighthouse." That night, Clara looked in the mirror. For the first time, she saw not a survivor, not a prisoner, just a woman. She wrote one last journal entry. "Room 13 no longer exists. I took it apart word by word." She published a final novel, not about abuse, but about rebirth. It became a quiet bestseller. Her proceeds went to shelters and legal aid programs for abused teens. And on December 13th, 2031, exactly 7 years after her father's death, Clara stood at the ocean again. The wind was harsh, the sky gray. She whispered, "I forgive you. Not for you, but for me." She dropped a small paper boat into the water. It carried no message, just silence. As it drifted away, she turned and walked back without looking over her shoulder. No ghosts followed her this time. There were no echoes, no fear, no room 13, only Clara, and the wide open world that finally belonged to her.